Alright, so picture this. It's a hot, muggy afternoon in early September, and Mark, a 30-year-old guy who's just starting to feel like he's got his life back together, was at the gym when I got the text. The kind of message that can flip your entire world upside down in 1 second. It was from my ex, Sarah. 28 years old, stunning, confident, and as charming as they come. She could make you feel like the most important person in the room. And, like a fool, I'd fallen for that charm, hook, line, and sinker. But then she did the one thing that wrecked everything. The thing that made me question everything I thought I knew about her, about love, and about myself. She cheated. I found out when I least expected it. My best friend, Mike, of all people, showed me the evidence. A stupid drunk text, a mistake on her part, and just like that, my whole world collapsed. You know that feeling? That gut punch when you realize you've been living in a lie for months, maybe even years? It was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do, walking away from someone I thought I'd be with forever. But I did it. And I was starting to heal, bit by bit. Then came that text, all these months later. Mark, can we talk? It was short, sweet, and the kind of message that felt loaded with things unsaid. I stared at the screen for a good 5 minutes before I even knew how to respond. There was this gnawing curiosity inside me, the kind you get when your mind starts spinning with all the what-ifs. But I knew better. I knew exactly what this was. She wanted me back. I could already hear the excuses in my head. It was a mistake. I miss you, but I didn't want to fall for it again. I couldn't. So I did what I thought was best. I ignored it. And then, another message popped up an hour later, this time longer. I could practically feel her desperation through the screen. Please, Mark. I know I messed up, but I can't live without you. I'll do anything to make it right. The worst part? Part of me almost considered it. After all, she was still Sarah. That girl I'd loved so deeply, so fiercely. But the logical part of me, the part that had been slowly rebuilding, was screaming at me to stay strong. And I did. I didn't respond. Not right away, at least. But then, she called. And I couldn't ignore it anymore. I picked up the phone, feeling the pulse of dread that came with it. Hey, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Can we talk? In person. Please. I need to see you. Now, I don't know what you're thinking, but I wasn't about to let her waltz back into my life just like that. Not after everything. Still, I agreed to meet her. I figured if nothing else, it would give me some closure. A final conversation to lay it all out, to remind her that what happened between us was over. That there was no coming back from it. So, we met at the same park we used to visit on weekends, the place where we carved our initials into a tree like the young idiots we were back then. The place where our love was supposed to last forever. Funny how things change, right? I showed up early, trying to calm my nerves. Honestly, I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but definitely not what I got. She showed up late, eyes red like she'd been crying for days, hair messy, looking almost fragile. For a second, I didn't even recognize her. But when our eyes met, it was like the floodgates opened. All the old memories, all the feelings, came rushing back. Mark, she whispered, her voice cracking. I've missed you so much. I know I messed up. I cut her off before she could say more. Sarah, stop. Just stop. My chest tightened. You don't get to do this. You don't get to come back into my life after everything. It's over. Her face twisted with something between guilt and anger. You don't mean that. You can't. I know you, Mark. We were good together. Don't tell me this is really it. But I wasn't backing down. Not this time. I've moved on. I'm not the same guy anymore. I stood there, looking at her with more resolve than I thought I had in me. And just like that, she snapped. The calm, sweet Sarah I had known? Gone. She was furious, shaking her head like I'd just told her I was moving to another country or something. Moved on? With who, huh? Her voice rose. Is there someone else, Mark? Have you replaced me that easily? I felt a wave of guilt rush through me, because yeah, I had moved on. In fact, I was engaged to someone else now. Someone who made me feel seen and loved in ways I'd forgotten were possible. Someone who wasn't her. But I couldn't bring myself to tell her that yet. Not in that moment. Then, out of nowhere, she shouted, "Who is she? Tell me, Mark. Who the hell is this woman you're with?" The air between us grew thick, suffocating. And that's when I realized I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't prepared for the storm that was about to hit. Her words hung in the air like a heavy, bitter cloud, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I knew I was supposed to keep my cool, but everything inside me was screaming. You ever had one of those moments where the anger, the frustration, the hurt, all come to a head, and you're just done? That was me, standing there in the park, barely able to hold it together. I could see it in her eyes, that frantic desperation, like if she just pushed enough, if she threw enough guilt my way, maybe she could twist me back into her orbit. It was almost like she couldn't fathom that someone could move on from her, that I wasn't still the same guy who would forgive her for a few teary-eyed apologies. You think I don't know what you're doing, Mark? She spat. You're just trying to make me jealous, right? Well, it's working. There was this sick, twisted gleam in her eyes, like she was trying to wrestle some sense of control back from me. I felt the sting of her words, but instead of caving, I stood taller. I'm not trying to make you jealous, Sarah. I'm not even trying to get you back. I'm telling you, it's over. I've moved on. And you should too. She took a step forward, her hands trembling slightly, but her voice steady, too steady. I don't believe you. You're lying to me. Her tone was sharp now, like a knife being drawn from a sheath. Who is she, Mark? Who the hell could ever be better than me? Her face twisted in anger, eyes flashing with a mix of hurt and rage. I almost felt sorry for her, but not enough to backtrack. I'd been the fool before. I had let her manipulate me into second chances, always thinking she'd change, always hoping she'd wake up and realize what she was throwing away. But now, I didn't owe her that anymore. She grabbed my arm, hard, and it took all I had not to pull away. Tell me, Mark. I have a right to know. Who is she? Her grip tightened as if trying to force the answer out of me. Sarah, let go, I said, trying to keep my voice as calm as possible. But even I could hear the edge creeping in. This wasn't the Sarah I used to know. This was someone desperate. Desperate to hang on to the past, desperate to reclaim something she'd destroyed. Her hand fell from my arm as if my words had burned her. She took a step back, swallowing hard, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was processing, calculating, probably figuring out how much more she could push before I cracked. And in that moment, I realized I had no idea just how far she would go to get what she wanted. Is this what you wanted, Mark? She asked, her voice now dangerously quiet, almost too quiet. You just wanted to rub it in my face? Well, congratulations. You've got your revenge. Now what? What does she have that I don't? Her gaze was like ice, like she was daring me to say something, anything, that could break her, make her feel like she had lost everything. I tried to ignore the sudden pit in my stomach. Her words were meant to tear at me, to get me to question my choices. And God, it hurt. It hurt more than I was ready to admit, more than I was willing to admit. but I refused to let it show. I wouldn't let her win again. "Sarah, stop," I said, my voice quieter now, but firm. "You had your chance. You blew it. It's over, and nothing you say is going to change that." Her breath hitched. Then her eyes, wide and wild, locked onto mine. She was starting to shake, her chest rising and falling with a steady rhythm, but I could tell she was about to snap. "You think it's that simple?" she demanded, her voice breaking at the end of the sentence. "You just get to walk away from everything we built? From everything we were? And you think you're just going to move on with someone else?" She was breathing heavily now, her hands fisted at her sides, and the anger in her face had morphed into something darker. "I don't care if you've moved on, Mark. You're not going to find someone who loves you the way I did. You're not going to find someone who understands you like I did." My chest tightened. Those words hit harder than I cared to admit, but I wasn't going to let her see it. "Not now." "I don't need you to tell me that," I said, struggling to keep my tone steady. "I'm not the same person I was when we were together. And that's not something you get to control anymore." She stepped back, her face pale, and for the first time, I could see the raw panic underneath her anger. This wasn't just about losing me, this was about losing control. Losing her grip on the situation. Losing the power she had once held over me. It was clear to me now, this wasn't just about me moving on, it was about her being afraid. Afraid that the illusion she'd created, the version of herself that she had so carefully crafted, was crumbling. The silence between us felt like it stretched on forever. Neither of us moved. And just when I thought she might finally back off, when I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd realize that this wasn't going to end how she wanted it to, she opened her mouth again. "What's her name?" Her voice was low now, but the anger was still there. "Just tell me her name, Mark. And I'll leave you alone." And that, right there, was when I realized this was never going to be simple. Not now. Not with Sarah. I could feel the weight of her words sinking into me like bricks in water, but I wasn't backing down. Her demand hung in the air like a challenge, daring me to cave. And for a second, I could see it, the picture she was trying to paint. She wanted to know my new fiancé's name, like somehow, that would make everything make sense. Like it would make her feel better, or maybe worse, depending on how you looked at it. But I wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. Not this time. I had learned the hard way with Sarah that if you give an inch, she'll take a mile. And that's exactly what she was trying to do. "You really think knowing her name is going to change anything?" I said, my voice a little sharper than I wanted it to be. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't going to let her see that. "It's over, Sarah. It doesn't matter who she is, or who I'm with now. I've moved on, and you need to do the same." Her eyes, wide and frantic, flicked to the ground, then back to me like she was trying to piece together everything I was saying. Her chest was rising and falling faster now, and I could feel the tension in the air growing heavier, thicker. The frustration on her face shifted into something darker, a storm brewing in those deep blue eyes. "You think I'm just going to accept this?" Her voice cracked, but she was still pushing. "You think I'm going to just roll over and let you walk away with some other woman?" I clenched my fists at my sides, the heat rising in my veins. "It's not some other woman, Sarah. It's someone I've chosen to build a future with. And you had your chance. Don't you get it?" She laughed, but it wasn't a joyful sound. It was sharp. Bitter. It cut through the air like a knife. "A future? With her? Do you even hear yourself right now? You're just trying to move on so fast because you can't stand that I'm the one who got away. You don't really love her, Mark. You're just running from what we had." I could feel the sting of those words like a slap, but I didn't flinch. I knew what she was doing. She was trying to make me doubt myself again. trying to make me second-guess everything, just like she always had when things got tough. It had worked before. Hell, it worked every time. But not now. Not this time. No, Sarah, I said, my voice low, calm even. You're the one running. Running from the truth. You don't get to rewrite the story here. You made your choice, and I've made mine. Her face twisted into something ugly, almost unrecognizable. Her hands were clenched at her sides, her jaw tight, and she looked like she was seconds away from exploding. It wasn't just anger now. It was desperation. Desperation that I was slipping away from her, and she had no idea how to stop it. You think you're so much better than me, huh? She spat, taking a step forward. You think you can just leave me behind, like nothing ever happened between us? Well, you're wrong. You're dead wrong. I'm not going to let you get away with this. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about you, Mark. I froze. The words hit harder than I expected. She'd done this before, threatened to ruin me, to destroy everything I'd worked for. The thought of her going to our friends, our families, of her telling them that I was the bad guy, it wasn't something I could easily shake off. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, she took another step toward me, almost getting in my face. I could feel the heat from her body. She was so close, I could smell the faint hint of her perfume, a scent I used to love, but now, it just made my stomach turn. Tell me her name, Mark, she demanded again, her voice trembling with rage. Tell me who she is, or I swear I'll burn everything down. I'll make sure you regret ever walking away from me. You think I won't? I felt my fists tightening, the anger bubbling up in my chest. I was done. I had given her enough chances, enough time to make things right, but she just kept digging the hole deeper. And now, it felt like she was trying to drag me back down with her. But then, something snapped inside me. I wasn't going to let her have this power over me anymore. Not after everything. Not when I had worked so damn hard to rebuild my life, to find someone who actually respected me. I looked her straight in the eye and finally said it. Her name is Emily. And she's everything you're not. The words hung between us, and for a moment, I didn't think she heard me. Her face went pale, and her eyes narrowed as if she couldn't quite process what I'd just said. But then, the truth seemed to hit her, and the color drained from her face. It was like watching someone's world crumble in slow motion. Emily? Her voice was barely a whisper. You're really going to marry her, Mark? I nodded slowly, keeping my gaze steady. Yeah. I am. And I'm sorry, but that's the reality. I've moved on. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. It was like I could almost hear her thoughts rattling around inside her head, the weight of the reality finally sinking in. She looked at me like I had just torn her world apart, and honestly, part of me felt bad for her. But another part of me knew this was the only way she would ever wake up. She stepped back, her face a mixture of shock, disbelief, and something that almost resembled betrayal. It was hard to tell. I didn't want to feel sorry for her, not after what she'd done. But seeing her like this, broken in front of me, made me realize something. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing the version of herself she thought she could control. And that was what hurt her the most. She opened her mouth to say something, but then, nothing. She just stood there, her eyes flicking between me and the ground. And in that moment, I realized the person she was angry with the most wasn't me. It was herself. The silence between us stretched, taut and uncomfortable, like a rope pulled too tight. Sarah stood there, frozen, staring at me like I had just detonated a bomb in the middle of her life. Her lips parted like she was about to say something, anything, but nothing came out. Her breath was shallow, her chest rising and falling in quick, jagged motions. And in that moment, I realized I had no idea what she was about to do next. Her eyes flickered, searching mine, like she was waiting for me to apologize, like somehow all this could be undone if I just took a step back. And for a split second, I almost felt the pull of the past, the guilt that comes with letting someone you once loved fall apart. But I shook it off. "Sarah," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "It's done. You need to accept that." She blinked, hard, as though my words were physically striking her. Her eyes shifted toward the ground, her hands shaking at her sides. But then she lifted her head, and the rage in her expression was like nothing I had seen before. It was almost animalistic. A look that said she was on the edge of something wild. "Done? You think this is done? You think I'm just going to let you walk away, again?" Her voice cracked, but the venom behind it was unmistakable. "You've moved on with her? That easily? I gave you everything, Mark. And you go and replace me like I was nothing?" There it was. The first real crack in her armor. Her voice broke for a moment, but then the anger surged back, hotter, fiercer than before. "I never replaced you, Sarah," I said, my voice low but firm. "I'm not replacing anyone. I'm choosing someone else. Someone who respects me. Someone who wants me. You had your shot, but you threw it away." Her hands curled into fists, and I thought she was going to lash out. The tension in the air was suffocating, and for a second, I feared she might actually hurt me, the way her body was shaking. I took a step back, instinctively. But then she took a step forward. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but there was no softness in it. "You think you found someone better than me? You think she is going to love you like I did? You think she's going to forgive you for everything? Because let me tell you something, Mark. You don't know her like I do." The words hit me harder than I expected. I had to swallow against the tightness in my throat. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. This was about Sarah trying to keep control. To make me believe she was still the one who knew me best. But I wasn't falling for it. "No," I said, my jaw set. "I know exactly who you are, Sarah. And that's the problem. You're not the person I need in my life anymore." She let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh, but it wasn't funny. It was dark. Full of bitterness. "You think I don't know that? You think I don't see what's really happening here? You're just trying to get back at me, Mark. You think you're going to build your perfect little life with Emily, and that it's going to be all rainbows and butterflies? Well, good luck with that." My heart was pounding in my chest, a mix of anger and adrenaline shooting through me. "I'm not trying to get back at you, Sarah. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just living." And that, for some reason, seemed to set her off even more. Her face turned bright red, her eyes wide with fury, and she screamed, actually screamed, her voice cutting through the quiet afternoon like a knife. "Living? You think I'm going to let you just walk away from me and live your damn life like nothing ever happened?" Without thinking, I took a step back, my heart racing. This wasn't her anymore. This wasn't the woman I had once loved so much. This was someone unrecognizable. Someone desperate. Someone who was willing to burn everything to the ground just so she wouldn't be left behind. "Sarah," I said, raising my hands in a gesture of helplessness. "Calm down. I'm not here to fight with you." But she wasn't listening. She was too far gone, her emotions out of control. "Calm down? You think you can just walk in here, tell me you found someone else, and I'm supposed to sit back and smile? You're not even a man, Mark. You're a coward. A liar. A fake." The words were like daggers, each one finding a way into my chest, but I refused to let her see it. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. Not after everything. I'm not a coward, I said, my voice steady, despite the storm raging inside me. I'm done being your punching bag. I'm done being your emotional support. I'm done with you trying to manipulate me into feeling bad for you. She let out a strangled sound, her eyes brimming with tears, tears that she hadn't shed until now. You're right, she whispered, and for a moment, I thought she was breaking. But then, she let out a bitter laugh. You're right. I have manipulated you. But I'm done now, Mark. I'm done pretending. If you think you can just walk away from everything we had and live happily ever after with her, well, you're wrong. My heart skipped a beat, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? She looked at me, a dangerous calm in her eyes now. You think you're going to just leave me here, in this mess of my own making, while you go off and live your perfect life with someone else? She stepped closer, her voice low. Not if I have anything to say about it. And that's when I realized this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The storm was only just beginning. I stood there, frozen, my mind spinning, trying to make sense of what Sarah had just said. The air between us felt like it was pulsing, charged with a strange mix of fury and something else. I didn't know if she was threatening me or trying to scare me into feeling guilty. Either way, it wasn't working. I was done. But I could tell by the way she was staring at me, the fire in her eyes, that she wasn't going to just let me walk away, not this time. The more I tried to walk away from this twisted mess, the tighter she gripped onto it, onto me. You're really going to do this, aren't you? I said, the words coming out slower than I wanted. It was as if saying it out loud made it more real, more final. She stood there, glaring at me, her chest heaving like she was trying to hold something back, some eruption that was about to spill out. You don't get it, do you? She spat. I didn't just lose you. I lost everything. And now you're just going to walk away like it was nothing? I could feel the anger rising in me again, the frustration from all these months of pretending to move on, pretending to heal. You lost everything when you cheated, Sarah, I said, my voice sharp. You think I don't feel that too? You think this doesn't hurt me? But I'm not going to let you drag me down anymore. Not again. She shook her head, like she was trying to convince herself of something. You're lying. You don't care about me. You never did. I winced at that. It stung more than I was willing to admit, but I didn't back down. That's where you're wrong, Sarah. I did care. I cared too much. And that's why I'm leaving. Because you don't know how to care anymore. You can't even take responsibility for what you did. You're still trying to turn this on me, make me the villain in your story. She took a step closer, her eyes wide, desperate. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mark. You've got to believe that. I was messed up. I made a mistake. It was a one-time thing. I didn't know what I was doing, but you're the one who's walking away from me, from us. You're the one throwing it all away. I could feel the knot in my stomach, the guilt threatening to creep in, but I fought it back. You've had chances, Sarah. More than you deserved. But you made your choice. You chose to hurt me. You chose to betray me. And now you're trying to make me feel bad for moving on? Her face twisted. I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen. You know that. Please, just come back. We can fix this. We can start over. I could see the tears welling in her eyes, and for a moment, just for a moment, I thought maybe I could give in. Maybe we could start over. Maybe things could be like they were before. But then I remembered why I was here in the first place. Why I had walked away. Why I was standing in front of her now, instead of beside her. No, Sarah, I said, my voice calm but resolute. We can't fix this. You broke it, and I'm not the one who's going to put it back together. I've been trying to put myself back together, and that means leaving this behind. It means walking away from you." Her face crumpled in disbelief, like she couldn't understand how this was happening. "You really don't want me anymore, do you?" she whispered. "You're really done with me?" The question hung in the air, the final blow, and I could see the cracks in her resolve, the raw vulnerability peeking through her anger. But there was no turning back now. I couldn't save her, not if she wasn't willing to save herself. "No, Sarah. I'm done," I said, my voice steady. "And you need to be, too. It's over." For a long moment, she just stared at me. Her whole body sagged, the anger draining from her face, leaving behind only emptiness. I watched as the woman I had once loved crumbled in front of me, and honestly, it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss. Not just for her, but for me, too. She turned away without another word, her back to me as she started walking toward her car, her pace slow and unsteady, like she didn't even have the strength to keep going. I stood there, feeling the weight of everything, of all the years, the pain, the love, and the betrayal. It was all there, in that moment, but the one thing that stood out was the quiet. The peace. It wasn't the peace I had expected, but it was peace nonetheless. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you made the right choice, even if it's the hardest thing you've ever done. I took a deep breath, then turned around and walked away, heading toward my car. I had a life to get back to. A life that was no longer tethered to Sarah. A life with Emily, where the future wasn't stained by the past. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her chasing after me, begging me to come back. But there was nothing. Just the empty road ahead. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally heading in the right direction.